Hey everybody, how's it going? Good Thursday morning. We're gonna put a bow on this little series of ours. If you're new, if you haven't seen the previous parts to this series, basically we're just taking a look at every NFL team and determining the players they could cut post June 1st to save a lot of money. And if you are unfamiliar with this series, I would recommend you go back and watch at least part one, possibly parts two and three as well. But I will reiterate at the top because I know I'm going to get some comments that are wondering what the heck I'm thinking with some of the players that I'm listing here. Um, Not every player I list here will get cut. In fact, most of them won't. This is purely a financial analysis. I understand that some of the players I'm going to list in this video would never get cut because they're good, they're productive, they're young, they're talented, they have potential, and that the teams that they're on don't need money that badly. In some cases, you won't see a player get cut for sentimental reasons, but this is purely to present a list of potential post June 1st cut candidates. A few people will get cut in the coming month plus, and these are the guys who could actually save their team some money if they were cut. That's the purpose of this video series. So, with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into team number one, the New York Jets. They don't really have a need for a lot of money because they don't have a big buck quarterback, but if they need money for some reason, they do actually have some really good cut candidates. You have Jamison Crowder, 27-year-old receiver, due 11.5 million this year, only due 1 million if cut. So that would be something that would make a lot of sense to do if they were if it was a different team. This team, I don't think you want to take away one of Zach Wilson's best targets in his rookie year. I don't think you need to save the money that badly, but saving over $10 million is pretty good. You have Alex Lewis. He's a guard, 29 years old. He's due 6.8 million, only due 800,000 if you cut him. So you could basically save 6 million. Greg Van Roten, a offensive tackle for the Jets. I don't think he starts for them, but I could be wrong. He's due 3.6 million this year, and he's due nothing if you cut him. So definitely look for the Jets to consider that if they end up needing 3.5 million. Ryan Griffin, 31-year-old tight end, veteran tight end, due 3.3 million, only due about a million if cut. You could save 2.3 million that way. Chris Herndon, another reserve-ish tight end. This one's a lot younger and has more potential, so less likely, but he is due 2.4 million this year, only due 170,000 if you cut him. Has to at least be a consideration if the team needs money. And we have Foley Fatukasi. That's the name. Defensive tackle, 26 years old. Another one of these guys at the tail end of their rookie deal. 2.2 million against the cap, only 40K dead. So those are the candidates for the Jets. Again, they don't really need to, but if they did, for some reason, these are the guys who make sense. Okay, next team is the Philadelphia Eagles. They have a lot of interesting choices to make this offseason. They might have the most interesting choices of any team in the league when it comes to their post-June 1st cuts. The first guy is the possibly crown jewel of this whole post-June 1st cut party. Fletcher Cox, a 30-year-old defensive tackle who is still very good, is due $24 million this year, and the Eagles are rebuilding, clearly. They just got a new coach. They're starting a new quarterback, or kind of new quarterback this year. They are rebuilding. They don't need to be paying $24 million to one guy. You can cut him and only owe him $9 million post-June 1st. So those savings of $15 million has to be a consideration. I mean, with Fletcher Cox, you got great years out of him. You got a Super Bowl out of him. You had great years on defense with Fletcher Cox. Might be time to move on. It would hurt, but look for them to at least consider doing it. Next, we have Zach Ertz. He was a guy the Eagles were really trying to trade, but it never manifested itself. So now they're probably going to have to just cut him. And if they do, they save $8.5 million. The cap hit goes from 12.7 to 4.2. So that's a savings of $8.5 million. That has to be appetizing for an Eagles team that is probably looking to cut salary in light of the fact that that team just they're in a transitional year, period. Next, we have Jason Kelce. This is kind of my God, how do I even want to put this? This is kind of my white whale, I guess you could call him. He's a 33-year-old center who is still very much elite. You don't save that much money if you cut him. 5.6 million versus 4.1 million. So you're only saving 1.5 million. So because of that, I wonder if the Eagles are just going to go, it's not worth it. But they did just draft Landon Dickerson. So clearly they have a plan for the future at the center position that does not involve Kelsey. So maybe they just go, you know what, we'd rather have the 1.5 million and just move on to the next era. Kelsey is clearly not part of the next Eagles era. Even if they're good again in a couple years, Kelsey will be 36 years old by then. So time to move on. Maybe they'll decide the time to move on is now instead of next year. And finally, we have, I think finally anyway, we have Avonte Maddox. He's another one of these guys on a rookie deal who is at the final year of it, and you could let him go if you want to move on. I don't think you would because I think this guy's actually been decent for them, but you could save over 2 million bucks if you did. Goes from a 2.3 million cap hit to a 160K dead cap hit. That's really it for the Eagles. They kind of already did their stuff. They cut, I believe, Alshon Jeffrey, and they might have cut Malik Jackson. And those guys manifested enough cap savings for them to feel okay about where they are. But if they needed to do a little bit more, they have some really good options on the table. And a team in this state, don't be surprised if they make a surprising cut. All right, that's the Eagles. Let's go on to our next team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. They have some guys who they really could let go to save a lot of money, but I think they're trying to squeeze out one more good year from this era, so unless they feel like they have to. I know they restructured Roethlisberger's contract, which helped them a lot in terms of salary cap stuff. They didn't re-sign Bud Dupree, so that helped. Obviously, he would have been very expensive. But as for guys they could cut now to save a bunch of money, the first guy is Stephon Tuitt. He's due 15 million this year. He's a good player, and he's only 27, so they probably would never do it. But they could trim down from 15 million to 6 million, save 9. Pretty good. David DeCastro's the next guy. They probably don't want to lose DeCastro right after losing Pouncey. They don't want to lose both those guys at the same time. But he is 31 years old. His play is starting to slip, and he's due 14.3 million this year. Only due 5.5 if cut. Again, you're saving almost 9 million bucks. You got to think about that stuff, right? Next up, we have Chris Boswell, kicker, 30 years old. Kickers can be good for a long time, but I don't know. I mean, Boswell's a good kicker, and it's hard to kick in Heinz Field, so having somebody who can hit field goals in that stadium is valuable. He is due almost $5 million this year, which is a lot for a kicker, and you could save over $3 million if you cut him, so you have to at least think about it. I think if you think you can find somebody a lot cheaper who can hit field goals maybe 85% as effectively. Who else? Who else? We have Terrell Edmonds. He's a young safety, somebody who I think they like, so I don't think they would be very excited to move on from Edmonds. But you could save a couple million bucks. 3.4 million cap hit goes to 1.5. So if you need to carve out $2 million, that's an option. Finally, we have Chucks Okorafor, offensive tackle. He's young. Another one of these guys who's on one of these rookie deals. A rookie deal that is about to expire. Due 2.4 million against the cap if on the team. Only due 200 grand if not. So that's basically it for Pittsburgh. The Roethlisberger restructuring that they did, I think, bailed them out of trouble pretty well. But if something happens to where they end up needing cap space, they do have some guys they could save a lot of money on if they cut. So these are the guys as I see it. Excuse me. And with the Steelers out of the way, let's move on to our next team. We are in the home stretch officially. All right, so we have the San Francisco 49ers, and they have one big, obvious bullet that they can fire. And I don't know why they won't do it, but it seems like they are very hesitant to do it. So once you look at this number, you're going to understand why I fully expected the Niners to just cut the cord, and it's not happening yet. Jimmy Garoppolo, quarterback, middle-aged, mediocre, injury-prone, didn't exactly endear himself to the team or fan base with how he handled his injury last year, it seems to me. Due 26.4 million against the cap this year, 26.4. 1.8 dead if you cut him. You pay him very little if you cut him post June 1st. Almost nothing. Now, if the Niners really don't need the money, I get it, but you just drafted a dude. I know they don't want to start him from week 1, but there has to be a better way than carrying a mediocre handoff machine for 26 million bucks. So I don't know if they are still planning to do this or not. Nobody's going to trade for him. Come on, let's just move along here. But yeah, Jimmy Garoppolo is the big gun they could fire if they decide they want to go on a free agency spending spree. They also have Lakin Tomlinson, middle-aged guard, 29 years old, due 6.6 million, only 1.6 million dead if you cut him. I think this guy is okay, but if in some financial hardship, look for the Niners to consider moving on. Raheem Mostert, he's a good running back. He's done good stuff for the 49ers since he got there. However, in the 49ers offensive scheme with Kyle Shanahan calling the shots, running backs are pretty replaceable. So Raheem Mostert, I don't know. I feel like if you cut him, you would forget that he exists as a 49ers fan after a few games because whoever the running back is in Frisco seems to work pretty well for the most part. Due 3.6 million, only due 460,000 if cut. That's it for the Niners, actually. Not a lot of options for them, but they have one big one. So let's go ahead and chug along to our next team. And this team we're very familiar with, right? The Seattle Seahawks. Now, I've done a lot of work this offseason to research the Seahawks' financial situation, and I feel like I've done a pretty good job determining that the team doesn't really need to cut cost right now, but that doesn't mean something can't arise. An opportunity to acquire another player could come up, and you might need to free up some cap space for them. So, if that happens, here are the guys that the Seahawks could release to save a lot of money. All right, let's go through. First is Bobby Wagner. He's aging linebacker. I discussed the possibility of moving on from him this offseason before, but after really stepping back and analyzing everything, I don't think the financial benefit was adequate enough. So I have kind of passively said this offseason we should probably just let him play out his contract for one more year and then move on next year. However, nominally, you could go from a $17.2 million cap hit to an $8.8 million cap hit if you cut him. You could save about half of that money. And that's a lot of money you could then go out and spend on somebody else. That is $8.4 million. So definitely an option if you really needed money, but having almost $9 million dead is something you really want to avoid. Next up is Dwayne Brown, aging tackle. I expected him to retire this offseason, so I was fully prepared to go into the 2021 season without Brown. At this point, he's clearly not interested in retiring, and the team is not interested in cutting him. But you could save a lot of money. You could trim down from a $13.4 million cap hit to a $2 million cap hit. So if something arose, that would probably be high on the Seahawks list of things to do. But for the moment, it seems like he's not going anywhere. He wants that last 13.4 million. He wants one more chance at a ring, and hopefully he's got one more year left in him. All right. Quandre Diggs is the next guy you could consider moving on from. Diggs is a guy you could probably trade rather than cut, but either way, you go from a $6.2 million cap hit to a cap hit of nada if you move on from Diggs. And now that the draft is over, it's somewhat less likely we do trade Diggs. And it's also very unlikely we cut him because he did make the Pro Bowl last year. But the ability to have zero dead cap and save 6.2 million has to be called out. So there's that. Brandon Shell is another guy I've talked about a bit this preseason, this offseason as a cut candidate. 29-year-old tackle. He's good, but he's not great. And his ceiling isn't very much higher than what we got from him last year, I don't think. Due 5.4 million, only due 2 million if cut. So 3.4 million, that's enough to maybe bring in one more veteran or at least pay part of a veteran salary. So maybe, but as I know this team better than other teams, I can tell you that the replacements you have on the roster for a guy like Brandon Shell, probably not good to go right now. So Shell's on the list, but I mean, you guys know, I don't think any of these guys are going to get cut. These are just the options if something came up. Jason Myers would be next. He's coming off an amazing season as a kicker for the Seahawks, so I don't think we care that much about this cap hit, but 4.4 million drops to 1 million if we let him go, saving 3.4 million. Now, Myers last year was maybe a top 2, top 3 kicker. So I don't really have a problem with paying him 4.4 million, but that's a lot of money for a kicker in general. And speaking of a lot of money to a kicker, let's take a look at our punter here. He is making $3.5 million against the cap. I don't think we would ever consider cutting him in any circumstance. He might be the best punter in the league, but you could go from a 3.5 million cap hit to 70 grand. And let's go ahead and just move on from that because nobody wants to cut Michael Dixon. We don't even want to talk about that around here. All right, Al Woods is next on the list. He's a guy we picked up in this offseason, so I don't think we would really want to cut him. However, if the opportunity is there to get somebody a little better, like, say, Fletcher Cox, wouldn't you much rather have that than a 34-year-old, 1 year out of the league Al Woods? Probably. He's due 2.4 million against the cap this year. His dead cap, I'm a little confused on. Spotrac says there would be no dead cap with cutting him, but it also says his signing bonus was 750,000, and signing bonus is typically dead money. So I'm a little unsure as to how that could be, but his dead cap hit would be either nothing or 750,000. It's one of the two. I don't know exactly which one. And Trey Flowers would be, I think, our final guy. Yeah, Trey Flowers is the final guy we're going to look at. Middle-aged cornerback, 27 years old, due 2.3 million this year, and as I've discussed, not likely to get a lot of playing time this year. He had his chance last year, he blew it, and now there are a bunch of guys in front of him on the depth chart. So you could go from 2.3 million to 70K. That might be worth it. That's 2.25 million. That's got to be considered appealing for a guy who probably won't get on the field that much because, again, he had his chance last year and he blew it. So those are the potential Seahawks cuts. As a fan, the only one I could see happening is Al Woods, and that's only if a better defensive tackle became available. But other than that, maybe Trey Flowers just because it's time to move on. But okay, that's the Seahawks. Let's keep on moving. Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, the Bucs are obviously in a win the Super Bowl now mode because they just won the Super Bowl. So they're not looking to cut costs. They're looking to spend as much money as they need to now to win, and they'll deal with the consequences later after their gravy train. So take all this with a grain of salt. None of these guys are likely to get cut. These are just financial analyses, like I said. So first is Mike Evans. You could save over 12 million if you cut him. And in fairness, Mike Evans can't stay healthy. Every time I watch a Bucs game, he's limping or he's holding his ankle or he's nursing something on the sideline. He's never healthy. So paying that kind of money to a receiver who can never get healthy is not good. You could only pay him 4.4 if you let him go. I'm sure they won't because, again, they're in win now mode. But at a certain point, you're going to start wondering, is Mike Evans worth all this stuff we have to go through? He makes 20 trips to the blue tent every year, it feels like. Ali Marpet would be next, offensive guard, 28 years old, due 12 million, only due 1.8 if cut. Big savings, over 10 million, has to be a consideration. I don't think you want to strip Brady's offensive line, though. He needs that, and the team needs that to win. So probably not this year. But if they were a different team with slightly different circumstances, those $10 million savings would be big. Ryan Jensen, similar situation. You don't want to take away Brady's offensive line, but you could go from a $10 million cap hit to a $0 cap hit. Always appealing to do. Got to talk about it. William Golston, a reserve defensive end, 29 years old, due $5.5 million this year. No dead cap if cut. The Buccaneers have some good defensive ends in front of him in JPP and Barrett. So you have to wonder if maybe they don't want to pay a reserve defensive end $5.5 million, but we will see. And Bradley Pinion, their punter, is due $2.8 million this year, which is not bad as long as you think he's a good punter, which it seems like he's at least okay. And he's due nothing if you cut him, so that has to be appealing. Some of these contracts for the Bucs are structured pretty well this year. 4 cuts, by the way. It's almost unfortunate that they're in win now mode, or else they could save a ton of money cutting some of these vets. That's not all. There are a few more players to go over. Young cornerback Carlton Davis, 24 years old, due 2.8 million, only due 320K if cut. Jordan Whitehead, a young safety, same position as Carlton Davis almost, due 2.6 million on the team, due 170,000 off the team. And finally, Alex Kappa, 26-year-old guard, $2.4 million on the team, $200K off the team. So another one of these guys on a rookie deal that's about to expire. So I don't think the Buccaneers are looking to cut costs because they're trying to go all out to win now. But if something came up, these are the guys you could see them letting go, especially near the bottom of this roster. Okay, moving right along, we have the Tennessee Titans. They have some intriguing options if they want to free up cap space. They did just pay Tannehill and they paid Derrick Henry. They gave a bunch of money to Bud Dupree. So it's not inconceivable that they need to strip a little bit of cap space. Here are the guys they could do it with. Taylor Lewan, offensive tackle, 29 years old. He's kind of a staple of that offense. It would be difficult to imagine them actually letting him go, but you could save about 11.5 million. Goes from 13.4 to 1.8. So that's got to be a consideration. I don't think Taylor Lewan is 100% what he was in his prime, but he's still really good. So something to think about if you need the money. Roger Saffold, another starting offensive lineman on this team. He's up there in years. He's 32. Due 12.3, only due 2.4 if cut. So you're saving 10 million if you let him go. And we also have Ben Jones, the center, 31-year-old center. So basically the whole Titans offensive line is paid exorbitantly, and it would make sense to maybe reduce the pay in one or two of those areas if they need the money this offseason. 7.3 million against the cap for Ben Jones, 1 million dead if let go. Pretty good savings. Very little dead money. All right, Brett Kern, the punter, 35 years old. He's starting to get up there. Punters can play a while, but still. $3.3 million cap hit, due $550,000 if cut. If you're ready to move on from Brett Kern, and I think Brett Kern made the Pro Bowl last year, or maybe it was the year before, not 100% sure, but you probably don't want to move on from a Pro Bowl punter while he's still in his relative prime, but you could save close to $3 million if you did it. Harold Landry, reserve linebacker on the Titans, due $3.2 million, only due $750,000 if cut. Could be a decent option if you need to free up a couple million. And that's it for the Tennessee Titans. Mostly, they need to consider if they want to trim down on the offensive line. They're spending a ton of money up there, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they did give a bunch of money to Tannehill, and they gave a bunch of money to Derrick Henry. Eventually, you have to start pulling money out of some other places. Okay, so that's the Titans. Let's move on to the Washington football team. We are getting right near the end, guys. So let's blow on through. First guy, Morgan Moses, another offensive lineman. He's a 30-year-old tackle, still an effective player. And by the way, this would be one of those guys I want the Seahawks to look at if he shakes free for right tackle to replace Shell. But due 9.7 million, only due 1.9 if cut. So savings of almost 8 million. Now, Washington is a team that feels like they can win some games now, so I don't think they're eager to take away Fitzpatrick's protection, but that's a team that is constantly finding themselves in some financial hardship, so maybe they end up having to make a surprise cut of a guy like a Morgan Moses. We also have Matthew Ioannidis, defensive tackle, 27 years old. Not really an appealing option because you're only saving 2.6 million and you still have 4.3 dead, but you could save that 2.6 million, get it down to a $4.3 million dead cap hit if you decide to let him go. I mean, that Washington defensive line is loaded. So it's not like he gets on the field that much anyway, right? Wes Schweitzer, offensive guard, middle age. He's a pretty good player, and it seems like Washington thinks he's a part of their future as well as their present. He is due $5 million this year, only due $1 million if you cut him. Has to be a consideration for $4 million if the Washington football team needs some money. Logan Thomas, their tight end, who was really productive last year. This one would hurt. They certainly don't want to let him go because he played well for them last year. But due $3.6 million, only due 1.1 if cut. Decent option. And John Bostic, a 30-year-old linebacker, the guy who tried to kill Andy Dalton last year, due 3.6 million, only due 880,000 if cut. So these are decent bottom of the roster options for letting players go. We have Cam Sims, a wide receiver near the bottom of the depth chart, who is due 2.1 million and due nothing if cut. And that takes us to the finish line, guys. So we have successfully looked at every single NFL team and all of the guys they could cut to save some money. Again, a lot of the guys we've looked at over the last week will not be cut. Some of them wouldn't even be considered. But the guys who will get cut were probably listed in this series. So let me know who you think is going to end up on the chopping block. Let me know who you want the Seahawks to go after. And I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Peace out, go Hawks. See you guys later today. I'm going to talk more about the schedule. And yeah, peace out, go Hawks.